Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Free Speech Forward podcast. I'm joined, as usual, by my co host and co founder, Chris Bush, and today we're here with Elizabeth. For those of you who don't yet know, Chris and we are the founders of an organization called 1776 Forward, sparking a cultural, philosophical, and political revolution for free society, grounded in the ideas of philosophical liberalism. And we co-sponsor this podcast we're doing with the Institute for Liberal Values, and Elizabeth has been a very prominent and vocal and wonderful champion and member of that organization. So I'm sure we're in for a really good chat today.
Yes, thanks for being here, Elizabeth. Great to see you.
Nice to meet you.
So before we dive into our discussion, just wanted to give our listeners a little bit background on Elizabeth. She, as Joia mentioned, she's a fellow and one of the founding members of the Institute for Liberal Values, one of our co-sponsors. And she is a PhD professor of psychology at Bridgewater State University, where she also served for over 10 years as chair of the Institutional Review Board. She has a degree in quantitative business analysis and an MBA in decision sciences, led an early career in business and consulting, which informs her psychological research on narrative, attention, and decision-making. When she's not engaged in compliance work, teaching, or managing her undergraduate research lab, Elizabeth is typically exercising or engaged in collaborative projects, including co-hosting the Dissidents podcast. So without further ado, Elizabeth, let's dive right in. So tell us how you came to being a free speech activist. Is this something you've always been engaged in and passionate about, or is there something that happened that kind of galvanized you to the cause? Tell us your story.
Yeah, I wish I could say that I was always. I guess if I'd been asked, I would say, in the past, I would actually, have said, yes, I'm a free speech advocate. I think most people probably would. But I certainly was not actively advocating for free speech until after I got canceled. And that is related to my compliance work. I was doing research with a group of students who wanted to do research on Black Lives Matter. And we collected data from over 400 participants, but somebody took a screenshot of a question. There was one question about Black Lives Matter, about 100 questions on the survey. One question about Black Lives Matter, they took offense and took a screenshot. And within, 24 hours, we were done. So it didn't take long at all. And so, I think that I was surprised. I thought that people would figure it out, and that this was just, it's research. You frame research questions. The gold standard in research is an experimental design. That's what we did. One of the questions was, a negative frame, in terms of, the perspective that the participant was supposed to take. It was a somewhat negative. It was two words, that were changed in a little couple of sentences. And, the question was about how would you spend money? You have a certain amount of money in your town to spend on, racial justice issues. How would you spend the money if this were the case in your community? And so, certainly we got open-ended answers that were like, oh, it's not like this in my community, or, that kind of thing. But one person took offense and said that they had been harmed. My university agreed that it was harmful, and and canceled us. So free speech, academic freedom in particular, an aspect of free speech, became very important to me. It had been, as in my work as a compliance officer for the Institutional Review Board. So listeners who don't know what that is, it is the ethics review process that all universities, hospitals have institutional review boards. Many businesses, research institutions all have either internal or external processes through which any research protocol must pass muster. And there are federal guidelines and international work too, international guidelines that have to be followed in order to get a study approved. A survey study is considered very low risk, as you can imagine. It's adults who know what they're getting into. People were not solicited for this study unknowingly. They were people who had signed up for a research platform, who chose a study to participate in, then received an email, then clicked on, then decided again to participate, saw a consent document, and then answered questions. So yeah, I mean, I think that the idea that free speech and academic freedom could be so fragile was very new to me. And it has then since become something that I am hyper aware of, most all day, every day, because now I do realize how fragile it is.
I think that just leads wonderfully into the next question we like to ask, which is, why do you think free speech and academic freedom to speak freely is so important, both to you personally and for a flourishing society and a flourishing higher education system?
Yeah, so, again, related to a research process, if you can't frame questions in ways that allow you to capture, what you would call, so when you do research, you know that there's some true value of something, okay? So like capital T, true, okay? Mm-hmm. And then most people really aren't that aware of their attitudes, I mean, again, even with free speech, right? It's like you're just kind of going about your day. You're not thinking about it, right? So people aren't really that aware of maybe their attitudes about toothpaste, okay? Mm-hmm. So you don't have a strong attitude about toothpaste. So if we were a marketer, marketing organization, we would ask people different kinds of questions framed in different ways. We wouldn't ask, for example, you like Crest, right? Right? That would not be how to find out whether people are going to buy Crest toothpaste. Right. Or you don't like, you don't like Colgate, right? So you don't do it that way, right? You frame questions in multiple ways, and you ask them these questions with sort of a negative frame, with a positive frame, with a neutral frame. You sometimes ask open-ended questions or scaled questions. Sometimes you do it from 0 to 100%. Sometimes you do it from 1 through 7. There's even different ways. Different researchers have different opinions about whether you should use an odd number or an even number. Do you let people be in the middle, or do you make people go to one side or the other? Mm-hmm. So these are all aspects of research that it seems minuscule, but this free speech and academic freedom impact this, because if you can be criticized or canceled or accused of causing harm simply because of the way you frame a question, which again is the gold standard of how you do research, then there's a serious conflict there. There's a conflict between engaging in not only ethical practice, but, good science and, this, what we might call cancel culture or a censorship sort of mindset. So yeah, it's not only important, it's really at the core of academic pursuits. If, we'll think even about, publishing, for example. If you find something that is, maybe against, going opinion, for example, or what people want to publish, want to read, in terms of, we could do with this, social, political environment, or we could go more science-y. Somebody finds something different, something unusual, if you can't publish that because the editors don't, are afraid to publish something that might offend someone's sensibilities, or if they're worried that they might get, bad feedback or something like that. If you can't do that, then how are we going to progress in science? How are we going to learn? I don't want to go down a vaccine rabbit hole because I don't know anything about vaccines. I'm not a biologist or anything. But how would we possibly know if a vaccine were dangerous,
right,
or if it were safe, if we could not investigate both sides, right? If we only said, oh, we're only going to look at how many people stay healthy. Okay, if you only looked at so that would be a more science thing versus how many people maybe don't stay healthy. They still, get a cold or the flu or whatever. Then we would never know whether a vaccine worked, because we would only be looking at a single, we would be doing a one-sided kind of test, right? That is true with, that's also true with attitudes and, political opinions and, again, with products that somebody might buy, that's how you do research. So you can't worry about whether you would offend somebody's sensibilities or temporarily. I mean, this is a momentary, this is a single question, or a temporary participation, going down the aisle. I'm offended by Crest toothpaste, well, you just keep walking then and don't look at it. So, and there are court cases, right, that say that you do your first duty, and I could quote the case here in a second, if it'll come to my mind. But your first duty, if someone is wearing a hat you don't like, or a t-shirt with a swear word on it and you don't like it, your first duty is to look away. So if you don't like that question, if you don't want to read about, people get cancer who don't survive. If you don't want to read about those, then don't read about that, and only read about cancer survivors. But, someone still needs to do research on people who don't survive cancer. You can't worry that you're going to offend the people who want to be happy and hope that their relative or themselves, that they're going to come out of it in a positive way.
That's a great point. I mean, freedom of speech is not only freedom to say what you believe, but also to not listen, right, to what you don't believe in. So, right. I think that's a critical point to highlight. I guess, this story is fascinating, especially as a non-academic, hearing kind of firsthand accounts. So now that you've gone through that, I'd be curious, kind of a fun thought exercise we do with all of our guests is, if you had all the time and money or resources in the world, what would you invest in as the most impactful and important cause to advance free speech?
I was hoping you wouldn't ask that question. I did see that on the list, and I'm like, I don't know, because I had these questions a week ago or what more, right?
Oh yeah, no, that's fine.
It is probably the most difficult question that we ask, but it is. We get interesting responses, and hopefully it gets people to think differently, which is what we hope.
Yeah.
In the spirit of free speech, yes. No bounds here.
Yeah. I guess I can say for sure, what I don't think is useful. I don't think training is useful. I don't think, in terms of interventions and at the adult level, like, oh, go to another online training. I guess that, basic civics education would be a lovely way to invest money, and just so that people are, I think that we're seeing more and more that you certainly can't change someone's mind as an adult once they have firmly planted themselves, in a camp, say. And I think that most people would, they're so invested in an opinion that they have said out loud, that they're not likely to respond to appeals to free speech. But I think maybe if it became sort of part of our core value system again, I think as young people, that it would remain the default. So, we've gotten away from, and uh, I think we've gotten away from some of that kind of education. There's not time, it's not time. We're doing like reading, writing, and arithmetic, however poorly we're doing that. And we're not necessarily doing, doing the civics kind of thing. So I guess that would be one thing. And then, maybe at the college level, I guess, because that's where I am, reinforcing that at intake, at when students come for a new student orientation, a reminder that you're going to be, if your classes are good, and if you're really getting a liberal arts education, you're going to be uncomfortable, and people aren't going to necessarily, you're not going to necessarily like everything that you're assigned to read. You're not necessarily, you're not going to like every one of your professors. But that's part of what it means to get a liberal arts education, is to be exposed to things, that challenge you in different ways, not just about free speech, but also, people that you might not like your first roommate. You might not like, all of those things are kind of wrapped up in this, right? This idea of remaining open, an open mind, and a generous spirit, to first not take offense, as opposed to first take offense, too. So.
Well, thank you for that. That, I think, was even a lovely demonstration of, you might not like a question that you are asked, but you still give an answer that I actually think I would agree with you that it certainly wasn't anything that I was taught in school, a kind of basic fundamentals of civics, liberal civics. That was not something that was ever offered to me from, wouldn't be appropriate in elementary school, but I never even got it in college. And this was already how many years ago, and so I'm sure there's nothing like that now. Well, I just want to jump ahead to our final question. At the very end, one of the things we're always hoping to do is to help inspire other leaders or aspiring leaders in free speech. And as someone who's been through the process of being canceled, I'd love to hear you speak any words of wisdom or advice for someone else who might be facing cancellation.
Well, one thing I would say is get help. Reach out, get help. Reach out to Institute for Liberal Values. Reach out to FIRE. FIRE was instrumental in helping me. I originally started with Counterweight, which was Helen Pluckrose, which doesn't exist anymore. Honestly, I just started emailing anybody. I mean, I emailed the Weinsteins. I emailed a bunch of people, and only a couple of people got back to me, but one of them was like an intern or, somebody helping out the Weinsteins. And they emailed me back and said, well, we can't help you. We get these all the time. But, they forwarded me on to Helen Pluckrose, who then connected me with FIRE, and so on and so forth. Get help, because, you're wasting time. You're allowing someone else to take hold of the narrative while you are waiting for them to figure out that they're wrong. So, because everybody that I've talked to who's been canceled has been like, oh, well, they're going to figure out that, this doesn't make any sense, and I'm talking about academics that I've talked to that have been canceled. They're like, oh, well, this is anti-intellectual, so they're going to come around. This was just a knee-jerk reaction, and they're going to figure it out. And they don't figure it out, that they get so invested in having already, again, sort of planted their, they've planted their themselves firmly in a political or ideological garden, if you will, and they're not budging. So, yeah, get help, talk to other people like ourselves, reach out and get some support, because you're going to lose a lot of people in your life because they're going to be afraid, not because they necessarily agree with what happened to you, but because they're afraid. That it's like when you're a kid and you're on the playground and you see someone being bullied, and you know that if you intervene, you're also going to be bullied. And so that's what happens to your friends. It isn't that they don't care. It's that they just want it. They just want it to go away. They want you to apologize and make it go away. And then the next thing is they're so heavily invested. They care about you. Your family and friends care so much about you that they want you to hurry up and get back to the way you were.
Yeah.
And you don't get back to the way you were. You just don't. You are a changed person. This is a very impactful event. It's like a social death, and you have to come back from it with new people in your life. Some of those old people will still be in your life, but not in the same way. And they will continue to push you to forget it, to get over it, all that kind of stuff. And it's not the kind of thing you just get over. You're living in a way with a chronic disease. And you may be able to tamp it down, and you're living your life most of the time as if you don't have that disease, but it's going to rear its ugly head every once in a while. And so you need to make new friends in order, in some ways, to preserve the old.
Yeah. So not only, in other words, to fight the battle as it's going on, but perhaps even more importantly, to have that support and social network for the new you, the new life that sadly often follows people in your position, right?
Yeah.
That's very, very, very useful. Thank you for that. Well, on that note, that completes kind of our time. We're out of time, so really appreciate you sharing your story. I think this will really, really have impact and carry weight for our listeners, and really drive home the message of free speech forward. And thank you for demonstrating how you continue to stand up and speak out for these critical values. For all of our listeners out there, as just a quick reminder, we drop a new episode of our podcast, Free Speech Forward, every other Tuesday. So our next one will be coming out in 2 weeks, June 18th. So look for us there, and you can find us on 1776forward.com and ilvalues.org. Thanks.
Thank you.